The second game of the playoff is set between Texas and Washington. Chip Brown and Chris Fetters are here to break down the Sugar Bowl. Steve Sarkisian facing his former Husky program, now as a Big 12 champ. The Longhorns, conference winners for the first time since 2009, the same year they last reached the national title game. Meanwhile, the Pac-12 champ Washington is celebrating its winningest season in school history with 13 victories. So historical seasons for both teams here. It's the first playoff appearance for Texas, the second for Washington, but the first for Kalen DeBoer. Chip, start us off. What would a win mean for each program here?
Well, outside of the fact that it would give Texas a chance to avenge every single loss it had from last season. They're 4-0 so far in avenging those losses. And of course, Texas lost to Washington in the Alamo Bowl a year ago. It would bring validation to Steve Sarkisian, validation to a Texas program that has had a reputation as a country club, an entitled program where kids weren't pushed to their maximum potential. And it would signal to the rest of the college football world that the Texas Longhorns mean business again. The mantra has been, the goal wasn't, just to get here. And so we'll see how that goes, but it would bring big time validation to Steve Sarkisian and the Longhorns program.
Yeah, and much like Chip said, with Washington, it would signal to the college football world that they're back, that the 2016 was not a fluke. And it would also signal to the program itself and to its fans that they were finally able to get over the hump and get to a championship game. Because the last time Washington competed for a national championship, you're going all the way back before 2016. You're going back to 2000 when they finished fourth in the country after beating Purdue in the Rose Bowl. And then before that, you're talking about the early 90s, obviously with 1991 when they went unbeaten. And they had that run of 1990 through 1992 where they had games where they were playing as a top three team in the country. So to get back to those types of teams, back to the heyday of coaches like Don James, and then recently with Chris Peterson getting to the college football playoff, Washington just has not been able to win a game of this magnitude. Every, New Year's Six game that they've played recently, whether it was the Fiesta Bowl against Penn State, the Rose Bowl against Ohio State, they have not been able to get over the hump. So a win over Texas in the Sugar Bowl would signal to Husky Nation that this team's for real, that 13-0 was not a fluke, that they have the talent and they have the ability and they have the coaching to not only get to the national championship game, but to also win a national championship for the first time since 1991.
This game, obviously a rematch of last year's Alamo Bowl when Washington won 27-20. The quarterbacks are the same, but there's plenty of other differences. So, Chris, what can Washington use from that first meeting in its preparation for this one?
Yeah, Grace, it's going to be interesting because as much of things have changed from last year to this year in terms of obviously they're going to be running a little different things. They're going to have some wrinkles. Texas is certainly going to have some wrinkles on their own. There are some similarities too. Obviously, you start with the coaches with Steve Sarkisian being familiar with Washington, Pete Kulkowski, Texas's defensive coordinator, being Washington's defensive coordinator under Chris Peterson. So there are a lot of similarities. And then there are a lot of skill similarities and line similarities in terms of the personnel that both these teams saw last year. I think the biggest thing, though, is that Washington proved to itself that it could go into the lion's den, that it could go deep into the heart of Texas and beat Texas in the Alamo Bowl in San Antonio. To be able to do that in front of obviously a clear partisan crowd, and it should be a pretty clear partisan crowd in New Orleans in the Sugar Bowl in the first, to be able to already have success, having been able to do that right in the middle of Texas, I think is probably the biggest thing right now that Washington can take from it. Because after that, that each team is going to throw their wrinkles into the mix. They're going to throw some of these new things that they have offensively, defensively, that they've had in their bag all season long, that they've been waiting to put out in the postseason. Because I guarantee you, Ryan Grubb on offense for Washington, and then obviously William Inge and Chuck Morrell on defense for the Huskies, they've had certain things that they've been lining up and they've had waiting to be able to spring on whoever they were going to play in the postseason. It just happens to be Texas this year.
Well, for Texas, they need to establish the run. In last year's Alamo Bowl, Texas did not have Bijan Robinson and Roschon Johnson, who opted out. And it turned out that Jonathan Brooks, the running back who played along with Keelan Robinson that Alamo Bowl, ended up having hernia surgery a couple days after that bowl game. So Texas tried to beat Washington at its own game by having a pass-first offense. It didn't work. Texas ran 18 times for 51 yards. And again, it was not a priority for Texas. The best way to keep Michael Penix and Rome Odunze and Jalen Polk and Jalen McMillan off the field is to run the football with C.J. Baxter and Jadon Blue. As we know, Jonathan Brooks out with the season-ending knee injury, but Texas has got to be more balanced against Washington this year after, as I said, running it only 18 times for 51 yards in that Alamo Bowl a year ago.
One of the key matchups we're watching is the Longhorns, T'Vondre Sweat and Byron Murphy against the Washington O-line. Sweat and Murphy are graded by PFF as the best defensive tackle duo in the country. So that's a tough test for a Huskies team that really favored the run game to end the regular season. Chip, how do you see this matchup going?
Well, this is a chance for a legacy game for T'Vondre Sweat and Byron Murphy, who've been outstanding. I don't think anyone in Longhorn Nation thought that they would be as dominant as they've been this season. T'Vondre Sweat, the better run stuffer, Byron Murphy, the better pass rusher. If they can rush four and be able to get pressure on Michael Penix, get him off his spot, that's going to help tremendously with the secondary and trying to contain Rome Odunze, Jalen Polk, and Jalen McMillan. So this, if you're a Texas fan, you're hoping that T'Vondre Sweat and Byron Murphy are saving the best for last, because if they can control the line of scrimmage and get, stop the run on the way to the passer, then the Longhorns' defensive assignment becomes a little bit easier. Not much, but a little bit.
Well, I'll tell you what, Chip, it's funny because when Washington fans hear the name Byron Murphy, they immediately go to the star cornerback for the Huskies that's now playing for the Minnesota Vikings. So to think of there's another Byron Murphy out there, and he's like 300 pounds, and he's an absolute monster in the middle for the Texas defense. That also has the Outland Trophy winner in T'Vondre Sweat. That's got Washington's attention big time. And you look at the three interior offensive linemen for Washington, they've had to do a little bit of juggling because they lost their starter, Mateo Mele, at center, second game of the year against Tulsa, and they had to put in Parker Brailsford, who has been nothing short of fantastic there all season long. But Brailsford started out at the right guard spot. So then they moved Julius Buelow out to right guard, and they left Nate Kalepo and moved him over to left guard. And it's been pretty solid for the last 10, 11 games. That's been your interior offensive line, and they have played fantastic. They've really helped guys like Dylan Johnson springboard and become the premier impact running back that they've really needed the second half of the season to offer up some balance to the passing game that everybody already knows about at Washington. But yes, this matchup between those two interior guys with Texas and the three interior linemen at Washington, when you talk about Parker Brailsford at center and you talk about Nate Kalepo at left guard and Julius Buelow at right guard, that is going to be the matchup to watch, I think, because that's going to open everything up. Like Chip said, it's going to help their corners and their secondary, but it's also, if Washington's offensive line can hold up, that's going to give Michael Penix Jr. the time he needs to not just find his impact receivers, but also find his valve guys like Devin Culp and Jack Westover at tight end, or Dylan Johnson, Will Nixon, those guys at running back that can help make an impact too. So this is going to be the premier matchup, I think, when you look at what Washington can try to do on offense.
Two of the most explosive offenses in the country here, both averaging over 36 points a game. But the side we want to focus on is Washington's passing attack against a Texas secondary that will be missing freshman defensive back Derek Williams for the first half of the game after his appeal for a targeting ejection was denied. Chris, how can the Huskies take advantage of his absence?
Well, I think there's a few ways they can do it, Grace, but I'm gonna paraphrase Mark Twain here, and I'm gonna say Texas's demise in terms of the secondary, I think, has been slightly exaggerated. If you go back and you really look at the stats, I know that Texas has been giving up a number of yards through the air, through their passing game, but the bottom line is they're averaging 6.3 yards per attempt. That's not a lot. That is not indicative of a team that's ranked in the 80s or 90s when you talk about overall pass defense. And so Washington's still going to have definitely their work cut out for them. And as we talked about, the battle at the line of scrimmage is going to be absolutely paramount. Washington's got to hold up in the middle to allow them to give Michael Penix some time to get rid of the ball, because timing routes is only going to get them so far. They're still going to need to take their deep shots to guys like Rome Odunze, Jalen McMillan, Jalen Polk. You've got some of these other guys that are coming into the mix, whether it's a Jeremy Bernard. They've had guys come in and out every once in a while to make impact plays. I mean, the guy that won the game for them in the Pac-12 championship was Quentin Moore, their tight end, that hadn't been really used at all during the season, just a little bit here and there. So they have guys kind of not squirreled away, but they have some guys here and there that might make some impact plays in the Sugar Bowl that maybe even Washington fans are like, oh, wow, I didn't realize that he was going to be in line to maybe make an impact play. So I think it's important that Ryan Grubb not only get his main guys going early against this Texas secondary, but I think that he also finds opportunities for some of these lesser known guys, because he's done a fantastic job of it all year. Because once the secondary starts to hone in on the Odunzes and the McMillans and the Polks and the known quantities, now all of a sudden it might be another guy like a Giles Jackson, or it might be one of these types of guys that all of a sudden comes up and makes an absolutely crucial play that could determine the outcome of this game.
Yeah, and for Texas, they've got to stay aggressive where they've gotten into trouble and they gave up those big chunk plays in the passing game. Even at the end of the Oklahoma game is when they tried to play soft coverage and keep things in front of them. That is not the mentality of the players that Texas has recruited in its secondary. And I think Steve Sarkisian went to Pete Kwiatkowski after the TCU game and said, we've got to play tighter coverage. That's what our guys are about. And when they've done that, they've been much better in terms of their pass defense. That's what you saw in the final games against Texas Tech and against Oklahoma State in the Big 12 title game. And so, they'll have Jahdae Barron, who's kind of their Swiss Army knife, nickel corner who can play safety. He's played both this year. He can help to cover until Derek Williams comes back from that targeting ejection suspension from the Big 12 title game after the first half of this Sugar Bowl. But guys like Malik Muhammad, Ryan Watts out at corner, they like getting up on receivers and trying to reroute them. And that's what Texas needs to do in this game. Because if you sit back and you try to keep things in front of you against Washington, you're going to get torn up.
All right, great analysis from you both as Texas and Washington get ready for this bowl game rematch. Chip Brown and Chris Fetters, thank you so much. The Sugar Bowl kicks off at 8:30 Eastern, January 1st. For more game coverage, check out Horns 24/7 and Dogman.com. They are keeping you up to date on all your Texas and Washington football and recruiting news all season long.